Welcome back, TCB faithful, to the Runback, the fighting game focused series that is slowly getting closer and closer to being reskinned into a fighting game focused series with erotic elements. Okay, that joke sounded way better in my head, but really, how else am I supposed to introduce today's game without just reading the title of the video and calling it a day? Because the game we're going over today has a history. No, not the beloved classic kind, but the kind where things quietly go wrong. Nobody admits it, and at some point the whole project takes a hard left turn into what can only be described as Stinky Pervert Simulator. And no, that wasn't the plan. That's just where things ended up. This is one of those stories about a game that didn't fail loudly. It just slipped, fell between trends, got reshaped, rebranded, and somehow still exists in pieces long after it probably should have disappeared entirely. So today we're talking about Force 5. Not to explain what it is, not to sell you on it, but to tell this strange, slightly embarrassing, and surprisingly human story of how it came to be, fell apart, and refused to fully go away. The story of the Force 5 doesn't begin with ambition, it begins on momentum. In the early 2000s, Anchor Inc. was still doing what Anchor Inc. has always done, making fighting games that were just a little off to the side of the mainstream. They weren't Capcom, they weren't Namco, and they weren't trying to be. Their games tended to be structurally interesting, mechanically odd, and frustrating in ways that felt intentional. They were a studio that kept showing up, doing solid work, and trusting that the genre still had room for them. And you can feel that pedigree immediately when you actually play Force 5. Movement is tight and fast but deliberate, attacks are readable, controls are simple enough to let you focus on timing rather than memorizing a 17-button combo. This is classic Anchor. A bit odd, a bit stiff, but built with people who knows fighting games. But Force 5 wasn't just a complete rehash of existing 3D fighter formulas. One thing they really tried to explore was projectiles, fireballs, and 3D space. And I actually mean 3D, not just throwing a Hadouken in a straight line. Most 3D fighters, even today, shy away with giving every character a unique projectile tool outside of the standard shuttle template. Force 5, however, made sure each fighter had their own style of fireball, with different speeds, angles, and behaviors. Some curved in midair, some bounced, some lingered. One fireball could be good for zoning, and another fireball could be good for wake-up pressure. Each one required players to actually think about spacing and timing in 3 dimensions, not just mashing buttons or hoping for a combo. It was a subtle but fascinating attempt to expand what 3D fighters can do, and it says a lot about the team behind it. While it felt as if they were making something just serviceable, they were still tinkering with ideas that could have set the game apart. Unique projectiles aside, Force 5 ultimately did come across as another job. Another 3D fighter built for Sammy's Animus Wave arcade hardware, designed to be readable, approachable, and cheap enough to justify the arcade cabinet in a market that was already shrinking. And while some of the ideas were neat, those ideas certainly weren't going to reinvent the genre or anything. I believe the main takeaway we got from our time with the game was it was just a functional fighter built by people who knew how to make one. And by most accounts, they succeeded. The game worked. Characters were modeled, stages existed, systems was in place. It was playable enough to be location tested, which is a lot more than you can say for a lot of canceled games. This isn't just vaporware, this was a thing, a real thing people stood in front and played. And then, nobody cared. The response to the location tests were cold, not hostile but worse, indifferent. Players found it underwhelming, rough, and a lacking of identity in a genre that's already shedded mid-tier 3D fighters like Dead Skin. Bugs didn't help. Incomplete movesets, missing animations, freezes after mashes, the usual signs of a game that needed more time, and a market that wasn't offering it. And it's easy to see why. Nothing is offensively bad, it just didn't stand out. Moves exist, combos exist, but there's nothing to make you stop and go, wow. This could have been a new Tekken or Soul Calibur killer. From my research, it was just an aggressive meh. And for most projects, that's where the story ends. The files sit on the server, the team moves on, and the game becomes trivia, if remembered at all. But Force 5 didn't die, it just got repurposed. Somewhere down the line, the game's assets and codes were acquired by Extractiva Japan, a company, judging by its footprint, wasn't exactly swimming in breakout hits. And now someone had a problem to solve. There was a nearly finished fighting game on their hands and it needed to justify its own existence. Here's when the timeline starts to get a bit goony. By the mid-2000s, arcade fighting games were in a rough spot. Budgets were tight, attention was scarce, and one of the last remaining levers you could pull to get eyes on your cabinet was sex appeal. Nothing too untasteful, just enough to make someone stop walking. Force 5 was rebranded into Jingi Storm for arcade, a game that is, structurally still mechanically Force 5, but now wearing a completely different vibe like an ill-fitting jacket. Like I just said, mechanically, it's still pretty much identical. All the stiff animations, simplified inputs, and conservative design choices are still there. Now awkwardly paired with unlockable art that, let's be honest, doesn't match the gameplay at all. You have a game designed around punching all these bland as hell looking dudes trying to sell you on sleaze, and it's hilarious. But to be honest again, if they were looking to push all these bland as hell fighters based on cheesecake alone today, it'll probably do very well. Just look at Street Fighter 6. If the internet's reaction is anything to go by, then that Chun-Li bikini outfit alone might have bankrolled the entirety of Mega Man Duo Override. Anyway, the core skeleton of 4-5 is still very much there, just painfully out of place under its new skin. Jingi Storm did release technically in 2006 on Naomi's hardware, to a market that had already moved on, and predictably it didn't land. The visuals were dated, the mechanics were unrefined, and the awkward erotic framing felt stapled on because it was. The game existed briefly, quietly, and then vanished again. This time for real. It's frustrating because under all that weirdness, you can still see the skeleton of a proper fighter. Timing, spacing, reads, they're all intact, just buried under dated visuals and awkward fan service. It's a game trying to be one thing while forced to be another. Years later, Force 5 would resurface in the most fitting way possible, through leaks, emulation, and fan preservation. And the finished prototype ROM made its way online, and suddenly this cancelled, rebranded, re-embarrassed fighting game had an audience again. This is where it gets fascinating. You could poke at incomplete movesets, unfinished animations, and see the design almost mid-thought. The game feels like someone paused development and never hit play again. And yet, through all its rough edges, it's compelling. More for curiosity than fun, but compelling nevertheless. And that's the human story hidden underneath all of this. Force 5 isn't a cautionary tale about horny developers or doomed design. It's a story about timing, about a team that made a competent game just as the doors were closing, about publishers who didn't have the luxury of patience, and about how creative work doesn't always disappear when it fails. It just gets reshaped, and sometimes into something deeply awkward, in the hopes that it might survive a little longer. Playing it now, I mean, say it with me, it's still awkward, it's still stiff, and it's still dated, but it's honest. You can feel the decisions, the compromises, and the half-finished ideas. Force 5 doesn't just tell a story through words, it tells one through every jump, punch, and missed animation. It did survive commercially, it did survive culturally, but it did survive long enough to be remembered. And honestly, that's probably the best ending it could have gotten. We'll see you next time on A Runback.